My true story from Ohio. At dinner with my in-laws, my son leaned in and whispered, "Don't talk too much. You embarrass us." I just smiled, then rewrote my will that night. "Mom, when you come, please just don't talk too much, okay? Everyone here's kind of high level." That was the message Matthew sent me at 3:02 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, just hours before I was to arrive at their combined Thanksgiving and birthday dinner for my daughter-in-law. No greeting. No, "Can't wait to see you." Just that. A warning. Like I was a problem they had to manage. I read it twice, then set the phone face down on the counter. My hands were still dusted with flour, and the scent of cinnamon clung to my sleeves. The apple pie was cooling on the windowsill, the same recipe I'd used when Matthew turned 10. Back then, he said it was better than birthday cake. Now I was told to keep quiet, to not make him embarrassed, as if I were a rusty hinge squeaking too loud in a polished room. I wore the purple wool dress I'd knitted last winter, the one with the careful cable stitch down the sleeves. Over it, I buttoned my late husband's brown coat. It still smelled faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco. The air outside was sharp with Ohio's late November wind, but I felt warm, not because of the layers. Because I was walking toward what I thought was family. I arrived 15 minutes early, just like I always did. Old habits. Early meant respectful. Early meant you cared. No one opened the door. I rang the bell. Nothing. Knocked lightly, then waited on the back patio as instructed by a text that arrived while I stood at the front. "Mom, wait outside. We're still entertaining guests." I sat down on the metal bench. My knees stiffened. My hands holding the pie began to lose feeling. I checked the old pocket watch my grandmother gave me. 12 minutes passed before anyone came out. It was my daughter-in-law. "Oh, hi," she said, as if surprised to see me. "You brought a pie? That's great. Let me check if there's space in the kitchen." She didn't ask if I wanted to come inside. Didn't ask if I needed help. She took the pie from my hands. Her long manicured nails tapped the foil lid. Then she carried it inside, just like that. A few minutes later, I saw it placed on a counter beside a plastic container with a Costco label. A paper tag reading, "Homemade apple pie," was slapped across both. No one would know which was mine. No one would care. When I was finally ushered in, the house was full of unfamiliar voices. Laughter that didn't pause when I entered. A playlist of soft jazz hummed under the murmur. There were wine glasses in every hand, name cards at every place setting. Candlelight flickered off glass and silver. I was told to sit at the head of the table, not out of honor, but as she explained with a giggle, so you can be close to the restroom just in case. A man in a tailored suit, someone from my daughter-in-law's work, turned to me during the salad course. "So, what do you do? Or did?" I smiled gently. "I used to sew. In winter, I'd go door to door offering to patch coats. In summer, I cut lawns and trimmed hedges." There was a pause, a tight silence, then a chuckle from across the table. The kind meant for shared amusement, not kindness. "She's very traditional," my daughter-in-law said quickly. "But times are different now. Everyone here's got at least a master's degree." Matthew didn't speak. He sipped his wine, eyes locked on the centerpiece. But I saw his knuckles whiten on the glass stem. Then he leaned in close. Too close. His breath smelled like the Cabernet I'd bought him when he got his first promotion. "Mom," he hissed under his breath, "don't say anything else. Please, you're embarrassing me." I didn't speak. I set down my fork, my hand trembling, not from cold, but from something deeper, something unnameable. I looked around, at the flickering lights, the polished plates, the sculpted napkins. Everything was pristine, picture perfect. No one here knew I once cooked 5 meals a day, 3 for Matthew, 2 for my late husband. No one knew I sold plasma 3 times a week to keep the lights on during his freshman year at college. No one remembered that I gave up my bedroom for a decade so Matthew and his wife could have theirs when they were saving for a mortgage. Now I was the embarrassment. Dessert came, my pie was sliced, served. No one asked who made it, no one said thank you. They ate while checking phones, laughing at something I couldn't see. I asked to leave early, claiming I had a headache. No one offered to walk me out. At home, I hung up the coat, slipped out of the dress, folded it carefully. I made tea, sat down, turned on the lamp beside the old photo of my husband in uniform. Then I opened Facebook. There it was, my daughter-in-law's post. Grateful beyond words, Thanksgiving dinner with the people we love most. A group photo. Everyone is smiling, champagne flutes raised, the long table behind them. I looked closer. I saw the corner where I had sat, or should have, but the crop was clean, precise. My face had been cut out. All that remained was a blur of lavender wool at the edge of the frame. I was the only one present, and somehow already erased. I closed the laptop, blew out the candle. I finished my tea, and in that moment, with the weight of silence sitting beside me like a ghost, I made a quiet promise. That was the last piece of pie I would ever bake for them. When Matthew was born, I was 29 and scared out of my skin. My husband had just come home from the war, a different man than the boy I married. He was quieter, darker around the eyes, waking some nights gasping like he was drowning in his sleep. But he held our son like he was something made of light, said his name like a prayer. Matthew. He wanted to name him after a friend he lost over there. I let him. We lived in a one-bedroom rental with creaky floorboards and walls so thin you could hear the neighbors sneeze. The radiator hissed like a snake when it tried to heat the place, and winters in Ohio were cruel. But we had each other. I would sew at the kitchen table, patching old coats for nickels, while the baby slept in a drawer we emptied out and lined with blankets. He died when Matthew was 15. My husband, cancer, fast and mean. They said it may have been the Agent Orange, but no one could prove anything. By then, he had taken a job at the post office, sorting mail in silence, and smiling only when I brought him tea in a thermos with a handwritten note, "Come home to me." He never made it back home from his final appointment. They called me from the clinic, told me he collapsed in the hallway. I rode the bus there, sat beside his body until they made me leave. I did not cry at first, not because I was strong, but because I was empty. After the funeral, it was just me and Matthew. I sold my wedding ring to pay off the last of the hospital bills, started cleaning houses on the weekend, and once a month, twice, when things got tight, I'd go to the plasma center, lie on a recliner for an hour, watching my own blood swirl in plastic tubes, and think about Matthew's future. I kept a small calendar in the drawer with red X's marking each donation day. I told myself just a little more until he graduates. He was a sweet boy, gentle, always looking out for me. Once, in the 2nd grade, he came home crying because someone called my clothes weird at the school pickup. That night, I stayed up making him a new shirt from leftover fabric, blue with tiny stars. The sleeves were uneven, the collar was too high. But the next morning, he stood in front of the cracked mirror, puffed out his little chest, and said, "This is my superhero shirt." My mom made it. That shirt lived in his drawer for years, even when it no longer fit. Sometimes, on his birthday, I would find a note tucked into my pillow. "Thank you for being my everything." Once, when he was 12, he told me, "One day, Mom, I'm going to buy you a real house, with a big porch and a rocking chair." I told him I did not need a new house, just him. When high school came, he changed a bit, started to pull away. Friends, music, girls. I understood. That is how boys become men. But he still let me iron his shirts for debate club, still kissed my cheek before bed. College was another story. He got a partial scholarship. The rest I scraped together. Between the sewing, the cleaning, and the blood, I never told him how close we came to losing the house. Never told him about the night I walked 5 miles home after missing the last bus, just to save cab fare. When he got his acceptance letter, he ran into the house yelling, swept me off my feet and said, "We did it, Mom. We." He said we. At the orientation ceremony, parents were invited to attend the first day welcome. I could not afford the bus fare and the new dress he wanted me to wear. So I chose the dress, a soft lavender one I found at Goodwill, and tailored myself, and I borrowed a neighbor's car. But it broke down halfway. I ended up hitchhiking the last 5 miles. I arrived as the dean was finishing his speech. Saw Matthew from a distance, laughing with new friends. There was no seat left, so I stood behind a row of hedges, watched from the shadows. When it was over, I left before he saw me. I didn't want to be the mother in scuffed shoes, the one with calloused hands and eyes too tired. A few days later, I found a thank you card in my mailbox. No stamp, just a hand-drawn heart on the front. Inside, in Matthew's messy handwriting, "None of this would be real without you. I love you, Mom." I kept that card. Still have it. The edges are yellow now, the ink is fading. But when I hold it, I remember the boy who thought I was a superhero. Years passed. He got a job, then a promotion, moved out. Then came the wedding. I gave him the last of our savings to help with the down payment. Gave him the deed to the house, well, most of it, 99%. The lawyer, a friend of my late husband, advised me to keep 1%. Just in case, he said. Paper storms come faster than real ones. At the time, I thought it was silly. Matthew would never, how could he? But I did it anyway. After the wedding, things changed. I was no longer Mom. I was Ellen. I got invited less, called even less than that. My homemade food was interesting. My stories were quaint. My presence was tolerated at best. Still, I kept making that pie every Thanksgiving. Still knitted him scarves every Christmas, even if I never saw him wear them. I still left his old room untouched, as if he might walk in any minute and ask me to iron a shirt. Because once, I was everything, and somehow I had become nothing. But I remembered every bedtime story, every fever I sat through, every sandwich I cut into triangles because he said they tasted better that way. I remembered the way he called my arms the safest place in the world. I remembered the way he danced with me in the kitchen when he got his first A. I remembered, even if he had forgotten, because I, the woman who birthed him, carried every piece of him, even the ones he had long since thrown away. In 2018, Matthew called me with excitement in his voice I had not heard in years. "Mom, I got the green light for the business loan." Almost. They just need collateral, and, well, the house qualifies. I was quiet on the phone. "The house? You still have a lot of equity. It'll be temporary. Once things take off, we'll refinance, and I'll put it back." The next day, he brought over papers, thick, stapled, and printed in that fine ink that smells like something official. He sat at my kitchen table, the one his father built from reclaimed wood after the war, and explained everything, with charts, with highlighters. I pretended to understand most of it. He needed my signature to transfer the deed, 99% to his name, so he could qualify for a lower interest rate. "It's just a formality," he said. I remembered what Joseph, my late husband's friend, and our old attorney once told me over coffee and stale biscotti. "If you ever transfer the house, Ellen, keep at least 1%, just in case. Never surrender everything, not even to love." I asked Matthew to give me one night to think. He looked surprised, almost offended, but he nodded. That night I went to the hall closet and pulled down the box labeled legal. Inside, among tax returns and birth certificates, was Joseph's business card, the edges curled like old leaves. I called the next morning. He met me in his office, same desk, same fern in the corner still half alive. He reviewed the documents and nodded. "As I suspected, they're clean. But you'd be wise to keep your name on at least 1%, and so I did. The following week I signed the papers. 99% his, 1% mine. I even baked a lemon cake that afternoon. Told myself this was what family was, giving, trusting, building a future. For a while I believed it was the right decision, but as months passed, the calls dwindled. The visits stopped altogether. Then came the dinner, the one where I was told to wait outside, the one where my pie was left nameless. 2 days later, still shaken from the cold reception, I decided to drop off a scarf I had knitted for my grandson. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I arrived with no warning, a thing I used to do freely when this house still felt like mine. I knocked, waited. Matthew opened the door halfway. "Mom? What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "I just finished this scarf and thought I'd give it to Danny before the cold sets in." "Oh, He stepped out, closing the door behind him. "Now's not a good time. We've got guests, and Rachel's doing a wine tasting with her friends." I blinked. "I won't stay. Just wanted to—" Behind him, I could hear laughter. high-pitched and sharp. A woman's voice floated through the hall. "Hey, whose grandma is that?" Matthew flushed, turned back to me, lowered his voice. "Also, just a heads up, okay? Don't touch the china cabinet when you come by. Rachel said you left smudges last time." The words hit like a slap. Smudges? I had polished that cabinet for years with a vinegar solution my mother taught me. My fingerprints had once been all over that house, on walls, doorknobs, furniture. Now I was a stain to be cleaned off. I left the scarf on the porch, drove home in silence. That night, a video appeared on social media, filmed during that same dinner. My granddaughter's voice narrated as she recorded the centerpiece and a brief pan of the guests. Then came the caption, added later, "When your MIL thinks she's the hostess." I watched it twice, then once more. The camera caught a glimpse of me in the background, standing by the kitchen door, holding a tray of teacups I wasn't even asked to serve. Just trying to help, just trying to belong. The comments stung more than I expected. "She looks so out of place. Someone get Granny a hobby, not the vibe." I sat on the edge of my bed that night and stared at the framed photo of Matthew when he was 7, arms crossed, sitting on the porch swing. Behind him, etched into the wood by a small hand and a dull knife, were the words, "Mom's Throne." I walked to that same porch 2 days later, during a morning fog, and found the swing still there, the carving now faded, barely visible beneath layers of whitewash paint. I ran my fingers across it, could still trace the letters with my thumb. M-O-M. The swing creaked under me, a sound I used to find comforting, but now it only echoed. It started with a tickle in the throat, a little cough that stayed longer than it should have. By morning, I felt the heat behind my eyes, the kind that whispers, "You are about to feel worse before you feel better." Still, I made myself tea, wrapped my shawl tighter. Ohio in December is not forgiving, especially for old bones. I sat by the window, watching the trees turn into skeletons against the gray sky, and told myself it was just a cold. But by noon my joints ached. I could barely keep the kettle steady. I had not called Matthew in weeks, not since the dinner, not since the video. But that afternoon, with my breath short and my chest rattling, I pressed his number out of instinct. It rang 4 times. Then his voice, cold, clipped. "Mom?" "Matthew," I said, trying to sound light. "I think I caught a little something, just a bug. I didn't want to worry you." There was a pause. "Did you take anything?" "Some Tylenol. But I've been alone all day. I just thought—" Another pause. I could hear a TV in the background. "Look, Mom, you're old. Stuff like this feels worse than it is. Just rest, drink fluids. There's nothing I can do from here." His words came fast, like he wanted to get through them quickly. "I know, honey, I've got a meeting. Call your doctor if it gets worse, okay? I'll check in later." But he didn't. That evening, I heated the hot water bottle, the same one my husband used when his back would seize in winter. It still smelled faintly of camphor. I pressed it to my chest and sat in the quiet. The silence in the house had grown heavy since the holidays passed. Not even the hum of the old fridge could drown out the echo. I fell asleep on the couch. Sometime past midnight, I woke with a start. My throat was dry, the blanket half on the floor. I shuffled down the hallway toward the bathroom, passing the guest room, the one I had prepared for Matthew years ago, still with his childhood posters on the walls. Then I heard them, the voices. He was in the room I once called his. He and Rachel. The door was slightly ajar. I froze. "She called again today," Matthew said. His voice was lower than usual. "Tired, maybe." Rachel sighed. "Let me guess. Just a little cough, right?" A pause, then a bitter chuckle. "She always thinks she's dying. Every year, some little thing becomes this whole drama." "I honestly thought last winter would be it," Rachel said. "Remember when she fainted at the farmer's market? I had the funeral outfit picked." Matthew laughed. Not harshly, worse, casually. "Yeah, same. But she's still kicking. Tough old bird. More like a barnacle," Rachel whispered, clinging to everything. I stood frozen, barefoot on the hardwood floor. The cold stung more than the fever. Matthew's voice came again. "I just want some peace. She calls about every sneeze, like we don't have our own lives." "I know, babe," Rachel murmured. "It's just..." She's not going to change. She still thinks she's the center of everything. And then, as if to hammer it in, Matthew added, "She's old. Everything feels like the end of the world to her. Honestly, I wish she'd just rest. Leave us alone for a while." I turned back down the hallway, careful not to let the floor creak. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of water with shaking hands. My reflection in the window stared back at me, pale, lined, eyes too tired. I took the hot water bottle and curled up in my late husband's recliner. It still had a dent where his shoulders used to rest. I did not cry. I just stared ahead, not at the TV, not at the clock, but into the stillness. And for the first time in all my years as a mother, I felt unnecessary, like a painting that no longer matched the room, waiting quietly to be taken down. The fever broke the next day, but the chill never left. I did not tell anyone I was going to see Joseph again, just dressed in my thick wool coat, the one with the fraying cuffs, and caught the 9:40 bus into town. Snow was melting in patches along the sidewalk, leaving behind gray slush that soaked through my shoes. His office was just as I remembered it, warm, slightly dusty, and smelling faintly of pipe tobacco. The same fern sat in the corner, now more brown than green, as if loyal enough to die slowly at his side. He looked up from his papers and smiled. "Ellen, I wondered how long it would take." I sat down without speaking, just handed him a copy of the house deed and the voicemail I had saved from the bank confirming my partial ownership was still valid. He reviewed everything in silence, glasses sliding halfway down his nose. Then nodded. "You still hold 1%. That's enough." I looked around the office. It felt like a waiting room for old ghosts. Then I took a breath. "I want to sell it," I said. "The house, all of it. I want out." Joseph leaned back, eyes narrowing not with judgment, but care. "Are you sure?" "I was sure the day I heard them call me a burden. This is just the paperwork catching up." He didn't ask more. He had known me too long. We spent the next hour going over documents, signatures, notarizations. I declined the champagne he offered from a mini fridge he barely used, settled instead for black coffee from a chipped mug. Once the last form was signed, Joseph set down his pen and looked at me. "Where will you go?" "I've already made arrangements. There's a cabin near Lake Logan. I rented it under my maiden name. Month-to-month lease. Quiet place. No TikTok there." He chuckled gently. "And your will?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded pages I had written by hand the night the fever broke. "I'd like you to make it official." He read through it silently. His eyebrows lifted once, then again. 60% to the Women's Trust Fund. For women over 60 left homeless by family, Judith's eyes said. They need dignity more than flowers on their birthdays. And the remaining 40% to a Dr. Amelia Cross? She's the little girl from next door. Used to come over when her parents fought. I taught her to read. She sends me Christmas cards every year. Last one said, "I wouldn't be a doctor if not for you." Joseph nodded, tapping the paper. "And Matthew?" I looked out the window. Snow had started to fall again. Clean, soft, blanketing everything. He waited. I turned back and said evenly, "Leave him nothing." He blinked. Surprised not by the decision, but the steadiness in my voice. "Nothing?" I smiled. "I leave him the freedom he seemed to want so badly, the relief of no longer pretending to care. That is my gift. He no longer has to act like a son." Joseph wrote it down, word for word. Before I left, he handed me a copy of the final paperwork. "Do you want to deliver the 30-day notice yourself?" "Yes," I said, folding the letter gently. "But not in person. It'll come by mail. With something sweet." He gave me a long look. "You sure about all this?" I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the photo, the one from Thanksgiving, the one where my body was cropped out, only my sleeve and the shadow of my profile barely visible on the edge. I slid it across the desk. They already erased me once. I stood, tucked the deed and will into my bag and turned to leave. "Ellen," Joseph said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "You deserved better." I paused in the doorway. "I did," I said, "but I finally gave myself better." The day the house sold, I baked one more pie, not because anyone asked for it, not because I expected it to be eaten, but because my hands needed something familiar, something warm, something that wasn't cold paperwork and silence. I sliced the apples thinner than usual, just the way Matthew liked when he was little. "Make them crisp, Mama," he used to say. "The crispy slices are my favorite part." So I made them crisp. As it baked, I laid out the rest of what I had planned, all of it neat, quiet, deliberate. A small box, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside, a single slice of the pie, carefully wrapped in wax paper. Next to it, a Ziploc bag holding one dried apple slice. I labeled it with a note written in my own hand. Matthew always loved the crispy edge slices. Mama still remembers. Next to it, I folded the photograph, the one they cropped me out of. I had printed the full version, pixelated as it was, and glued it back together, my cut piece scotch-taped back on, crooked and obvious, but complete. I stared at it for a long time before folding it again. And then, the letter, written on cream stationery I had saved for something meaningful back when I believed holidays were sacred. This time, I ate the whole slice myself, and I remember every word you said, every smile that wasn't for me, every seat I wasn't invited to, every thank you I never got, every time I waited outside in the cold. "You don't have to call me anymore. I've already heard everything I needed. Mom?" I sealed the box gently, tied it with twine, took it to the post office before the snow could start again. When I returned to the cabin, the wind had picked up. Trees leaned like they were bowing goodbye. I made tea, set my phone face down, and sat in the stillness. It did not stay silent for long. The phone lit up. Once, twice, 7 times, 11. Matthew. First, just a call, then a voicemail, then text. "Mom, what is this? Can we talk? Where are you? Are you okay? This isn't funny." I turned off the sound, let the phone go dark again. There was nothing left to explain, nothing I wanted to hear, not anymore. The cabin sat on the edge of Lake Logan, hidden between tall pines and silence. It was small, just 1 bedroom, 1 stove, and a window facing the water. But it was enough. Every morning, I watered the thyme and rosemary I planted in mismatched ceramic pots. In the evenings, I read, not for distraction, but for peace. Real peace, the kind no one gave me, the kind I had to carve out for myself. The wind off the lake had a voice of its own, whispering through the trees, reminding me that even endings can sound like music. Then, one Tuesday in mid-February, she came. Rachel, the receptionist, knocked lightly on my door. "Miss Ellen?" she said. "There's a woman here to see you. She says it's urgent." I did not look up from my book. "What's her name?" "She says, Rachel. She says she's your daughter-in-law." I paused, let the words settle, then closed the book with care. "She's not family," I said. "Tell her Ellen does not receive people who called her a burden." The girl blinked, unsure. "Should I tell her to come back?" I smiled. "No. Tell her I said goodbye 2 weeks ago. I just hadn't mailed it yet." An hour later, I walked to the window and saw Rachel's car still parked, engine off, hands on the wheel like she was waiting for a different answer. I placed a single dried apple branch on the windowsill, the same kind Matthew used to collect in fall for school projects. I tied a small red ribbon around the stem, the last ribbon from the old sewing drawer I brought with me. It said nothing, but it said enough. Rachel eventually drove off. I did not watch her leave. I only listened for the silence that came back afterward, the sound of a woman finally alone and not lonely. The fire in the wood stove crackled softly, sending flickers of orange across the cabin walls. Outside, the lake had frozen over, the world wrapped in white and silence. Inside, I sat in the armchair facing the window, a wool shawl draped across my shoulders and a cup of black tea cooling beside me. The copy of my will lay open on the table. The ink was dry, the signatures firm. Nothing more to edit, nothing more to hope for. Beside it sat the only framed photo I had kept, my husband, in uniform, his arm around a little girl with missing teeth and a wide, eager grin. Amelia. Now, Dr. Amelia Cross. I remembered teaching her to sound out Apple and April, her finger tracing each letter in the air like magic. She never forgot me. I turned my eyes to the drawer beside me. Inside it was an envelope, yellowed and creased, addressed simply, Matthew. I had written it weeks ago, in the middle of the night, when the need to speak to him one last time pressed against my chest like a stone. I never mailed it, never would. but I read it often, not to remember, but to finally let go. Matthew. If you ever find this, and I don't expect you to, know that I tried. I truly did. I tried to be the mother you needed. I tried to stay out of the way when that seemed better for you. I tried to forgive what you didn't even notice you'd done. I kept every drawing you made as a boy. I stitched your name into every school sweater. I cooked, I saved, I gave. And still, somehow, I became the part of your life you wanted to crop out. I don't hate you for it. That's the hardest truth. I thought I would. But the older I get, the more I understand. People don't always hurt us because they're cruel. Sometimes they hurt us because they're weak. If I ever embarrassed you, I'm sorry. But I'm more sorry that you only saw shame where there was sacrifice, that you saw noise where there was love. You won't have to be ashamed of me anymore. I've gone where no one can find me, just like you wanted. Goodbye, Mom. I folded the letter slowly and placed it back into the drawer. A goodbye should never beg. I stood up and moved to the bookshelf. There, tucked between cookbooks and gardening guides, were my journals. Decades of pages, full of daily notes, grocery lists, memories, arguments, prayers. No one would read them, but that was fine. They had served their purpose, keeping me sane when silence felt too loud. That night, I lit a single candle and placed it by the window, a tradition I kept since my husband died. He used to say, "A light in the window means someone's still home." Not anymore. But I kept the ritual. I made myself a modest supper. Soup, a biscuit, and one final slice of pie, one I had frozen from that last batch. The first bite was sweet but not overwhelming, balanced, like I always tried to be. I looked out at the trees, their bare branches reaching like hands that had finally let go. Then, quietly, I whispered to the room, or perhaps to myself, I used to think family was forever. Now I know. Memory is, and memory can be sharpened, refined, delivered without raising your voice. It had been nearly 17 years since I last visited his grave on a weekday. I used to come every Sunday, rain or shine, sometimes just to sit in the car and watch the leaves fall near the headstone. But life and pain had a way of making the visits less frequent, the silences longer. That morning, I brought a small thermos of coffee and one of his old scarves, still carrying the scent of cedar from my closet. The cemetery was quiet, a light breeze pushing the gray clouds across the sky like slow-moving regrets. I found him right where I left him. The stone was simple, just his name, his rank, and the words I had chosen back then. Loved quietly, fought fiercely. I knelt beside the grave, placing a dried apple branch near the base, something that meant nothing to anyone else but everything to us. "Well," I said softly, brushing some pine needles off the lettering. "I did it," I smiled. Not proudly, but peacefully. They said I was a burden, a shadow, that I embarrassed our son. I traced his name with one gloved finger. But I didn't scream. I didn't slam doors. I just remembered who I was. The wind picked up slightly. "I'm not bitter, you know. Not anymore. Just lighter, as if you finally passed me the map you were always holding." I sat there for a while, quiet, present. Then I heard the footsteps, slow, hesitant, not the kind that belonged to groundskeepers or joggers. Matthew. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe I had stopped looking closely. His coat was too thin for the weather, his eyes rimmed red as if from sleep or guilt. He stopped a few feet away, his hands trembling slightly. "Ma," he said. I didn't answer. He looked down at the grave. His eyes traced the stone like it was the first time he'd really seen it. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." I nodded. Not at him, but at the headstone. Matthew took a step closer. I didn't know how to. I stood up, brushed the grass from my knees, and looked him in the eyes. There was no hate, no forgiveness, just recognition. "You don't have to know," I said gently. "Not anymore." He opened his mouth as if to speak again, but I had already turned back toward the path. Some goodbyes don't need words, just distance. Revenge doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just signs a paper and walks away. Some people learn through forgiveness, others through absence. I gave my son every chance to know the weight of a mother's love. When he dropped it, I didn't raise my voice. I raised my worth. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been made to feel small in a house you helped build, you are not alone. My name is Ellen, and this was my true story. For more stories like mine, quiet, real, unforgettable, subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Because some voices don't fade with age, they only get clearer.